this important, from my point of view, of course, this important evening, which we are going to speak about the peace process. This is something that we can speak a lot about it. So we are going to do it again in this place. I would like to ask the head of the, how we call it, the center? The Lab Center? Center, Ephraim, please, Ephraim, to start and some words for the beginning of this important evening.
Thank you, Udi. Thank you all who came to this meeting, which is dedicated to the book of Dr. Hirschfeld. Allow me first to try to define what is track 2. Track 2 is a dialogue or negotiation conducted outside the official channels of intergovernmental diplomacy. This is not track 2. I can praise myself that I was one of the first ones who conducted track 2 dialogue with the Palestinians in 1988. People today cannot imagine that there were days in this country where to talk to Palestinians, it was forbidden by the law. And those who spoke to Palestinians were supposed to sit in jail for doing so. So there was one paragraph in the law which said that it can be done through academic institutions. The world is still alive. I wish him good and long years. Professor Helmut Kellman from Harvard, and he hosted in Harvard a meeting between Israelis and Palestinians. This was the first track 2, I think, between Israelis and Palestinians. From our side, I vividly remember the late Zev Schiff, General Shlomo Gazit, Yair Dayan, Ambassador Shamir. It was quite nice, Professor Yuri Tamir, nice group of Israelis and of Palestinians, like Ziad Abu Ziad, Hassan Khatib, people who became ministers later on in the Palestinian government. From my experience, there is a sense in track 2 only if track 1 takes the fruit of track 2 and continues with some official tangible result. So track 2 is quite a frustrating job. I can give one of the examples that I was involved in 2003, 2004. In a track 2 diplomacy, I reached agreement with the Palestinians, with the Palestinian government about how Israel withdraws from Gaza, not in one step and unilaterally, but through a very concerted, coordinated process, which gradually gives the authority to the Palestinians while eradicating terrorism in Gaza. It was an excellent plan, but track 1, in that time, Prime Minister Sharon didn't want to hear about it. And he went to the famous unilateral disengagement. So there is a sense in track 2, and that's what makes the difference between, I would say, maybe interesting, but futile intellectual exploration, if there is a track 1 which takes it. And maybe the one who succeeded with track 2, which continues to track 1, is Yair Hirschfeld, that, he was the mastermind of the most famous track 2 operation, which is also also negotiation. And if we can praise him a little bit, as our tradition says, if one reads the books of Ron Gunda, the late Ron Gunda, who was his partner, he reveals that without the intellectual ingenuity of Yair, there was no. Somebody would say it could be a good thing, but I'm not exactly among them. The Center for Strategic Dialogue, and this is the answer to your question,
Center, that's the one, okay.
Is dealing a lot with track to diplomacy, especially with countries where the track one is bumpy or even does not exist. Jordan, Turkey, these are few of the examples of what we here in Netanya are doing. So nothing is more natural than we celebrate the publication of Yair's book on threat to diplomacy here in the Academic College in Netanya. And I wish you good luck with the next track too that you conspire.
Okay, thank you, Ephraim. I would like to open the discussions. And I would like to say from the beginning, which this is a masterwork of Yair Hirschfeld, is very important because it brings us a lot of information, but also about the knowledge of the negotiation between us and the Palestinians. I don't know if you know, but I participated in the process as in the track one. I was the head of the negotiation team with the Palestinians under Prime Minister Olmert, what we call Annapolis process. And I would like to say somewhere, because I can speak a lot about it, but I would like to say somewhere because we are speaking now about lesson learned, about the negotiation. And there are some issues that I would like to share with you as the beginning of the discussions between the experts. The first issue, which is very important, that we have to understand the situation of the asymmetric situation between us and the Palestinians. We are coming to the negotiation table. I speak about Israel. Israel coming to the negotiation table from the gate of power. We control over the area. We decide if it's open, if it's closed. We have the IDF, which give us a lot of opportunities. And the Palestinians coming to the negotiation table from the gate of the rights. This is the only things that they can bring to the table, the rights. And they would like to anchor the rights. So the main objective of the Palestinians during the negotiation, first of all, is to anchor the rights before speaking about implementation. And Israel coming to the negotiation table in order to achieve a permanent status agreement, which we can implement it on the ground. And this creates, in the beginning, the asymmetric situation. This asymmetric situation creates the big mistrust between us and the Palestinians. Because they have their objective, we have our objectives. It's very difficult to bridge between those objectives. And of course, the relations between the leaders can support to help us to deal with the problem of the mistrust. But as we see the situation today, which there is no any trust between the leaders, between Abbas and Netanyahu, so there is no really any real negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. The other point, which is important, and I assume that we will discuss it during this evening, is the formula of the negotiation for 20 years. We started with formula which still exists, which is saying that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. It was in order to create the flexibilities when we discuss some of the issues. But it created a problem that we cannot go forward. Because if we have to wait and to agree upon all of the issues, we cannot go forward. And we speak for a long time that we have to change the formula, that the things that we can agree or the things that we agreed upon, we have to move immediately to the implementation stage. And I assume in that case that the track 2 help us from time to time to find those steps that we can go forward in order to change the reality. Because if we cannot change the reality in one movement, we have to change the reality by small steps, and this is something very important. There is another issue. I would like to take the opportunity that I am sitting here and I have the opportunity to speak. We used to blame Israel, you know, especially the foreigners used to blame Israel upon the situation that there is no peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. But if you check really the negotiation along the years, every time that we arrive to the final, let's say the final approach of the negotiation, it's the time that we have to take all of the core issues as a package. Core issues is territories, borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees, end of the claims, and two-nation state, or two states for two people. When we have to bring it as a package with a trade-off between the core issues, every time the Palestinians have decided to run away from the negotiation table. Didn't give an answer, not yes and not no. And it was better for them to go out from the negotiation table. Of course, Israel policy today, especially the settlement policy, creates a situation that everybody can blame Israel, that there is no agreement, but this is something that we have to be aware. There is no agreement. There were so many attempts to achieve that agreement, and we cannot blame only the government of Israel about that. So we have 4 people which will be part of the discussions. The first one is Brigadier General, retired reserve from the Israel Orion, of course, which was the Deputy National Security Council, the head of the National Security Council, and before that she had a long service in IDF. And you know, it's not so simple to arrive to the rank of general as a woman in IDF. Today the situation it's better, but we have a lot of steps to do in order to go forward in that case. She is involved in a lot of activities in order to create something positive, part of Geneva initiatives, peace and security, and other activities in order to create better future for all of us. And I would like you to start, Israel, and to bring your lesson learned from the negotiation until now.
Thank you, Udi. I would like to start with a personal angle, because I know Yair for at least the last 15 years. And I must say that the unique combination of creativity and a very logical way of thinking and your passion for peace is an inspiration for me. Thank you, Yair. And it's true, because every time we reach some kind of a dead end, Yair would come up with some kind of an idea that God knows how come that nobody else was thinking about it, and here it was. So thank you again for this too. I would like to raise a few points with regard to lessons learned. My involvement in the issue of negotiation is also in track 1. I would like to, and also in track 2, but I would like to talk about track 1 first. And this is the issue of the Palestinian refugees, and I was asked to lead the group that was working on the Israeli position paper on the Palestinian refugees towards the Camp David summit in 2000, which we did. And so this is basically my track 1 experience, and then I was involved in other track 2 experiences, and my lessons learned are the following. First of all, one should define carefully the interest and divide between the true interest and the false interest. The important one from those that are not so important, and to really draw a line between them, and to know exactly where are the red lines of the position. The other thing is that not to try to win the other side in any cost, because then it could come out and could appear as a, I don't know if it's the right English term, but Pyrrhus victory? Okay. Because sometimes you feel as if you were winning through the process. And I remember Yossi Beilin told us about the negotiation of Oslo, and I'm sure that Yair is familiar with this, that one of his lessons learned was that he regrets some of the victories that were done by the Israeli side during the Oslo process. One of them has to do with the settlements. And two other points that I would like to raise here is it's very important to see the final target, the final goal while negotiating. You have to be very tough in your final goal, but you have to show some flexibility during the way. And to try to see where are the points where the interests meet. It's not everything is a zero-sum game. And sometimes when the Israelis and the Palestinians are negotiating, it looks as if it's a zero-sum game, but it doesn't have to be this way. And because the basic idea is to get to this agreement, which is, and the reason to get to this agreement is a win-win point, I believe. Two other points was that Udi Decker raised, that one of them, Udi Decker raised, is the issue of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Of course, this is some idea that wants, the idea behind it is to give the negotiating team some kind of flexibility. So it will be easier to make trade-offs along the way. But I must say that I agree with Udi Decker, and which I don't agree all the time, by the way. No. But this time, yes, I do. I believe this was a serious obstacle in our way to reach some kind of an agreement with the Palestinians, and not only with the Palestinians. And my last point will be, sometimes we are dealing a lot with the psychological effect of the leaders that are negotiating. Do they really want, and they just cannot do it because of internal opposition and internal problems? And I'm not talking only about the Israeli side, I'm talking about the Palestinian side as well. And I would say that the time that we wasted about if he wants and he's not able to do it, if he doesn't want and he's just pretending, it's a waste of time. One thing that I have learned in the military, that at the end of the day, what counts is the results. And this is an important point, and you have to show results. Otherwise, all the psychological analysis are really not necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Israela. And the next speaker will be Professor Moshe Arens, which was the Minister of Defense, twice the Minister of Foreign Affairs, three times, okay, one time. Yes, after Eiti Mordechai, the third time, yes, of course. Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ambassador of Israel to the United States, and a long career in the Israeli defense activities. I would like to understand your point of view about what are the possibilities that we can promote a peace with the Palestinians, and what is the best way to do it, if there is any way to do it.
Well, let me start first of all by commending Dr. Hirschfeld and his associates, who invested a great deal of thought and effort in what I think all of us would agree is a very commendable cause, and that is to bring peace to the area, to avoid bloodshed, to improve the condition of Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians who live in the area. I know that that was their aim, and that that was their intention. I assume still is their intention. I don't mean to be sarcastic when I feel I nevertheless have to add in parentheses that we know that not always good intentions pave the road to commendable ends. And the Oslo Accords, which I guess in large measure are the result of what's called the Track 2 efforts that were made, I don't know if it would be correct to say behind the backs of the democratically elected leadership, at least initially. Would that be right?
No.
Not right.
No, it's absolutely wrong.
The Prime Minister was fully aware of
The
it?
Prime Minister is fully aware of it.
Okay.
And it was a 13 years work together with the political leadership in line with an agreement that the Likud had signed and led in the implementation of the agreement that was rejected again and again by the Likud government. So it was a fully Track 2 in its essence is an instrument to serve the leadership. It can tell the leadership if an alternative policy is doable or not. Track 2 is successful if we would have come home from Oslo and we would have told Prime Minister Rabin, this is not working, we would have served the purpose. There have been other Track 2 exercises before where this was the case. So everything else that was said is part of an incitement campaign on the right wing, which is based on, I don't want to pull you up, but it's been with terrible internal repercussions that we all know of, and therefore I would actually say, no, this is absolutely not true.
Okay, well I see that I've stepped on a sore spot.
Yes, you did.
Here my impression was that Prime Minister Rabin at the time was still fully engaged in the negotiations in Washington while the Track 2 was going on in Oslo.
No, he wanted the negotiations in Norway to test Arafat if he's willing to renew the negotiations in Washington are broken off because Mr. Tavedano was murdered, and there were we took the 18, there were the 400 sweet guys of Hamas who were sent there, and the negotiations were broken off. And Rabin wanted Oslo to succeed in forcing Arafat to agree to the renewal of negotiations in Washington without solving the Hamas issue. And that was his support. Then it got, therefore he supported it all the way. At a certain point in April, we wanted to break them off. And we came back in big time as we promised actually to fulfill his will, to get the Washington talks renewed. And then from that moment on, he was fully on board, and everything done there was totally under his direction.
Okay. If I understand correctly, I understand then that the contacts there did not begin until they were given the green light by Prime Minister Rabin.
Yeah. There was green light. There was a decision of the Labour Party before the elections to move ahead to get self-government for the Palestinians. And this turned out to be the only way how to do it.
Okay, I don't mean to belabor the point.
But it's a good idea that you will manage the discussions and
You got the wrong man here.
I immensely...
because I have a lot of things to say about it.
Okay, fine. So, be that as it may, and I'll certainly take your word for it, you're the authority on the subject. The intentions were the best, the results not so good. Because if we look at the Oslo process and the Oslo agreements, I would venture to say that the Oslo process in effect was buried 10 years later, not far from here, at the Park Hotel in Netanya, where 30 people were killed and over 100 injured by an outrageous terrorist act committed by Palestinians, which then brought about military action in defensive shield, again, the entry of the IDF into Judea and Samaria, that in effect put an end to the wave of terrorism. I think that what many who are seeking to find a solution to the conflict with the Palestinians, what we like to call a Jewish-Palestinian conflict, or an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I guess basically probably more a Jewish-Palestinian than Israeli-Palestinian conflict, do not fully realize, or maybe do not fully want to realize, the complexity of the conflict that we are looking at and trying to resolve. The conflict is basically a three-dimensional conflict. With the Muslim world, with the Arab world, with the Palestinians. If we go back chronologically to the days of the Mandate, to the days of the UN partition resolution, it was in those days not even seen as a conflict with Palestinians, but a conflict with the Arab world. And behind the Arab world and backing the Arab world was the Muslim world. And you can look at the votes at the United Nations, and you can see the identity of views and the closeness of support by the Islamic world to the Arab world and of the entire Arab world vis-a-vis the position of the Zionist enterprise and eventually the State of Israel. And I think that once you realize that this is a three-dimensional conflict, you begin to see just how difficult, in some ways maybe intractable, is it to bring about a quick solution or resolution of that conflict. Now, those seeking to do that, and I commend them for their good intentions, are inclined to think that maybe you can unwrap it like an onion, start with countries in the Islamic world. We've made some progress with Islamic countries. Israel for a while had very good relations with Iran, not anymore today. Again, an indication of the complexity of the problem and the degree of instability that characterizes relations with Israel. With Arab countries, and we have a peace treaty with Egypt and with Jordan, but that doesn't solve the entire situation. And some would think, and maybe at first sight it might seem like the natural way to go right to the root of the onion, resolve the problem with the Palestinians, then everything will fall away on its own, of its own weight. But once you examine that situation, you are brought back to reality to realize just how dysfunctional the Arab world is today, especially today, and how dysfunctional the Palestinian political framework is. And you ask yourself, with whom will you negotiate, with whom you can strike a deal, and who can implement the deal. Now, in Arab nation states that were under dictatorial rule, that seemed for a while quite stable, at least in principle, you could say, if we reach an agreement, we've got somebody that can implement the agreement, that can impose the agreement, even if the population of this country is not enthusiastic about it. That was the case in Egypt. Sadat was not a democratic ruler. He ruled Egypt. He was able to implement the agreement, whether the majority of Egyptians liked it or not. Unfortunately, although we had that small perturbation, when Morsi came to power after Mubarak was brought down from power, you now have a Sisi, and he wants to, and he is, at least for the time being, implementing the agreement that was signed with the State of Israel. In Jordan as well, for our friends in Jordan, and they are our friends, will permit me if I say it is not a fully democratic regime, and maybe if democratic elections are held in Jordan, the peace treaty with Israel might be abrogated, but we have a regime friendly to Israel with very strong security interests, common security interests with Israel, very important to both countries. That makes it its business to maintain the relationships of peace with Israel. Now, maybe there was a time, at the time of the Track 2 negotiations, when Yasser Arafat was the recognized leader of the Palestinian people. And maybe this was a time when there was reason to assume that whatever you agreed with him will be implemented. Whether the majority of Palestinians like it or not. He'll make sure that that is what's going to happen. But Yasser Arafat is no more. I think everybody will agree that the Palestinian political framework is far more dysfunctional today than it was then. It is not at all clear who a partner is amongst the Palestinians that is representative of them, capable of signing agreement, and capable of implementing any agreement they were to sign. We like to focus on Mahmoud Abbas, who I guess was number 2 to Arafat in his days. It is clear that he does not have that kind of authority today. And it's also clear that if you were to sign the agreement, there would be lots of people, not of no consequence, in the Palestinian political establishment, who would not accept whatever he would sign. And their voices are heard today, even before such an agreement is ever signed. My own guess is that Mahmoud Abbas realizes this only too well. And if we look for reasons why he tries to go to the United Nations or looks for other methods of advancing the Palestinian cause, it's because he knows that he's not in a position to sign the agreement, to make concessions, to implement such an agreement. So we're left with the status quo. One alternative to the status quo is not the only one that seems to be available at the moment, is some unilateral move. And we've had a history of unilateral moves in the area. We've had the evacuation of the Jewish settlements in Gush Katif, the evacuation of the Gaza Strip. That has not produced any positive results. And although people now and then impatient with the present situation and prepared to do almost anything to change the situation, have talked about a unilateral move in Judea and Samaria as well, the evacuation of settlements, the withdrawal of the IDF, freeing ourselves of that burden and the constant accusations against the State of Israel about its presence in the area, but a closer look of the consequences of that kind of situation. In the background of what happened in the case of Gaza, I think convinces most people in Israel, I think almost across the entire political spectrum, that would not be a very wise thing to do. So if somebody asks the question of room for track 2 or track 3 today or track 4, the first question would be with whom? In the days of Arafat, that was not a question. If you wanted to do track 2, there was somebody or somebody whose representatives you wanted to talk to. At this moment, the answer is a big question mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lawrence. And the next speaker will be Emil de Bon. He is the deputy head of the mission of the embassy of the Netherlands to Israel. He is in the tour of duty of the foreign service of Dutch for more than 20 years, almost all over the world. And now, unfortunately, you arrived to the Middle East. Lucky for you. As the last position was the head of the Dutch Foreign Ministry Strategic Planning, so I assume that you know the policy behind the foreign policy of the Dutch. Especially, I can say that for many years, Dutch supporting the peace process between us and the Palestinians, track 1 and track 2 at the same time. So please, Mr. Emil de Bon.
Thanks, Mr. Duck, for your kind introduction. I'm not so sure if I should thank Yair Hirschfeld for calling me onto this panel. Had I known in what company I would find myself, I might have found an excuse to actually sit in the audience rather than at this side of the table. Especially because I've been in now for almost 3 years, and that's long enough to realize that I'm not an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I probably never will be. I read Middle Eastern history at university, but I have to confess that after one trial lecture on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I decided to give this theme as wide a berth as possible. Already then, back in 1990, I guess it must have been, The whole atmosphere was so polarized that students were screaming at each other, they were screaming at the lecturer. And for me, this was something that was incompatible, I think, with more pressing priorities of student life. You can guess what those were. The title of your book, Yair, I think it speaks volumes about the obstinacy of this subject matter. From 1978 till 2014. Frankly, I don't know whether to shake my head in despair or not in admiration for your staunch perseverance. I think less than many would have given up long ago. So I salute you, Yair. I salute you for keeping the flame. I value your companionship, your wisdom, and I congratulate you on publishing what I think is a hugely important book. I mean, by definition, track 2 diplomacy is not something that is written about very much. I'm sure it will serve today's and future practitioners. Maybe a few words on Dutch-Israeli relations so that the audience here knows where I come from. So, you know, I represent my country, I represent my government, and that's not an easy thing to do in this place. Welcome to the Middle East, indeed. Dutch-Israeli relations are deep, they're broad, and they're often very personal. And I think in your book already we see some examples of very intimate Dutch involvement in peace efforts. We care deeply about this country, and we care deeply about its security. Early 1950s, I think, Holland was provided arms and munitions to Israel when probably no other country would. Patriot batteries were stationed here in 1991. They weren't very effective, but at least they were here. At the moment, our defense and intelligence cooperation is tight, it's enduring. Our Air Force is bombing Daesh in Iraq. Our combat veterans from Afghanistan are training the Peshmerga and the Iraqi Special Forces. We're doing various things to assist Jordan, which of course is also vital to this country. We were the first country in Europe to list Hezbollah, including its so-called political wing. We don't distinguish between the two. And we're in the forefront of making sure that Hamas is being put back on the list as well. I think maybe just as importantly, we played a leading role in building the sanctions regime against Iran. And since we know how EU decision-making works, believe me, we put in some safeguards that will make it very difficult to have this whole regime unravel at the stroke of a pen. On a personal note, I've lived here now for almost 3 years, and I took a trip to an Iron Dome battery last week to thank the very young crew for also keeping me and my family safe. This may not be our fight, but I live here too, and these missiles are also aimed at me. So I think we're not blind to the convulsions raging through this region, as Israelis sometimes accuse us of. I think we have a very clear eye as to what is going on. Now, I'm not going to lecture you on the need to resolve your conflict with the Palestinians or how to. So many efforts have been made, and again, I'm in company that knows much better. I will say this, however. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I have to read this very carefully, has embedded itself like a disease and spreading tick in our own political domestic discourse. And that is a worry for us in Europe, but also in my country. As I said, it's hugely politicized, it polarizes society, and it excites people's fervor to levels that, in my humble opinion, leaves little room for common sense and mostly clouds their judgment. It's come to a stage where you're either for or against one of the sides. I can't change that. It's as a professional, I have to acknowledge this situational reality. There's nothing much I can do about it. Interests and lobby groups from both sides proliferate and shape debates and political positions in foreign capitals in ways that may not always be about your interests here on the ground or of those of the Palestinians. Now, you may rage and rant against this, you may think it's unfair, you may think it's stupid, and I probably would agree with you, but it's a fact of political life. And the more and longer Israel is seen through this lens, this prism of being the stronger party, the occupying power, the more this country's true friends, like my country, are being driven into a corner from which it is very difficult to stand by you and stand up for you. My government is not about to recognize the Palestinian state. Our new foreign minister has reiterated this point recently, and following a spate of declarations in other capitals. We do insist, however, on seeing the parties work towards this ultimate goal, and at the very least, when times are not conducive for negotiations, to refrain from steps that are contrary to this goal. Track 2, diplomacy. As I said, I'm not an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I do have, however, 20 years of experience in negotiating. Mostly small, local deals, including with lovely Taliban guys or even lovely Tajik warlords, and occasionally more complex arrangements with heavy interference from world capitals. I have a few lessons of my own, not maybe related to this conflict, but you may find some of them relevant for your situation. I think the first rule that I learned is know yourself. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Israel is a vibrant democracy which expresses a hugely complex and I think often conflicted political society. Who you are, what do you want, what are your limitations? You need answers to those questions. It's elementary. Because if you don't know yourself, how can you expect the other side to trust you? The second one, know the other side. I think Yair will confirm that several months before the carry negotiations were suspended, let's call it that, I was warning my capital that they were not likely to go anywhere, because I could see that the Palestinian leadership was preoccupied with domestic troubles. Guys jockeying for position to take over from Abu Mazen, efforts underway for so-called reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, lots of other things. And you can just feel this is not a time to be nice to the Jews. This was a time to score points over. Different example from my time at the OSCE in Vienna, the Organization for Security and Cooperation. I was chairman of the Finance Committee. It's a very powerful committee, actually. And we were negotiating a big deal. My Russian colleague kept promising that the agreement would come, and it didn't. And time and again, we promised and promised. And he was only saying "niet, niet," which didn't mean no in Russian, it means not yet. And nobody could understand why, because the deal that was on the table was good. It was good for them. Basically, we were handing the Russians what they were asking for because they were right in asking for it. Conspiracy theories, big words. The Americans were going nuts and were about to travel to Moscow themselves. So, as chair, I used the back channel, a very senior Russian UN official who advised me on occasion. And asked him what's going on. And okay, he says, well, I'll get back to you. It turned out that Moscow didn't trust its own man in Vienna because they couldn't believe that he actually got the deal done. And they were afraid that apparently he'd made some promises to us that he didn't want to tell his own capital. So the solution was I was to travel to Moscow and tell them myself. Anyway, we got the deal done. Rule number 3. There's only 25 of them, so just a few.
Okay, no problem.
Know what you are negotiating. Again, it sounds like an evergreen, but you can't allow for conceptual confusion. Negotiators tend to get up in the dynamics of detailed deal making. I've seen it time and again. You risk losing sight of the big object. So, what is it that Israel would like to negotiate? Is it peace? Is it divorce? Is it a partial withdrawal and security arrangements? I mean, these are not the same things. And depending on what it is that you intend to negotiate, you have to adopt a certain approach. I mean, you can go to a shop and buy a carpet, and you can drive the price down and down and down and completely infuriate the salesman in the process. You can afford to do that, because when you need a new carpet, you go to another shop. But I suggest this may not be the right way to actually negotiate peaceful coexistence with your neighbor. Israel mentioned something along the same lines. It's negotiating peace with your neighbor is not a football match. There are literally no points for scoring a point over your opponent. Another thing, when you can make a concession, sometimes it pays to do so generously and not ask something in return straight away in a direct exchange. The debt will be there, and what's better, the debt will be there undefined. It helps you in some ways. People here tell me, you don't understand. This is not the way the Middle East works. This would show weakness. Well, I'm suggesting this tit-for-tat approach hasn't gotten you very far so far, so maybe you should try something else. And frankly, I don't think anybody here considers the Russians a bunch of pushovers. I can tell you that sometimes making a concession, not asking anything in return, worked just fine with them. As a matter of fact, it got them totally worked up. It unsettled them. Because they know very well that at some point they knew I would ask for something in return, but on my terms and the time of my choosing, and they wouldn't know what or when. It actually helps you, it strengthens you. Not every time, but bear it in mind. Rule number 4. I'm almost there. Always be in control of the process. My Ironman rule, when I chaired the finance committee, we had 55 members, everyone had a veto. All my deals, every single deal was done in the back room. I only went to public committee meetings when the whole choreography was in place. I would have my allies, even my enemies, lined up exactly what to say when, where. And I think it's particularly relevant for this situation when you have such an excessive amount of external interference, ideological positions, and a long history of violence. The only place where you can exercise some control, I think, is in the dark, away from the limelight. I mean, if you go out there into the light, you're only inviting grandstanding, and it won't get you anywhere. Peripheral vision, situational awareness, these elements are crucial. Events, after all, have a habit of intruding when you least expect them. Finally, the obvious one, personal relations, matter more than anything. And I don't mean negotiators have to like each other. God knows, I couldn't stand my Russian colleague in there. But we managed to negotiate big deals, $500 million worth annually. Because we knew each other and we came to trust each other, at least on the professional level. He knew my limitations, I knew his. And once this misanthrope, I'm not sure how you pronounce it in English, understood that all these dirty little tricks to undermine my authority as chairman of the committee were not going to be working, he came to respect me as a negotiator, and we got things done. I can tell here, I never respected him. I just didn't let him notice. No partner, yeah, is what we're told. For this government, Abraham is not a partner. We all know the feeling is mutual. So we wait for elections. And let's assume Netanya is returned as Prime Minister. Abu Mazen enjoys long health and remains in place for several more years. This, of course, just a hypothesis. So what then? We continue in this impasse, which we all know will lead to new violence? Or maybe not negotiate peace or final states, but maybe something else. It's just a thought. What about this? I alluded to it earlier. This very complex set of very vicious wars raging out there, likely to continue for many years, if not a generation. It's on your doorstep. It's on the Palestinians' doorstep. I don't think either side wants this one to come into your house. God knows Jordan is not served by any implosion of the West Bank. And I think we all know how Egypt feels about Hamas in Gaza. So maybe, I'm suggesting, just maybe, there is a fraction of a communality of interest here. In my experience, if there is a communality of interest, there is a basis for partnership. That's something else than security cooperation. And if there's a basis for partnership, you will find a partner. Maybe impossible, but it doesn't make it any less necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Sir, thank you very much. You have another 20 points, as you know.
Yeah, I'll leave them behind.
Because it's very interesting. And now, Dr. Hirschfeld, Yair, I can call you Yair, yes, of course. And it's very important for me, especially how you manage track 2, what are the objectives of track 2, the time that there is track 1, and the time that there is no track 1, and how can you coordinate between track 1 and track 2, especially because of the situation, the unique situation that in the Palestinian side, the same people sitting in the track 1 and track 2. And only in the Israeli side, every time we change the people, of course, on our side, but not the same people sitting in track 1 and track 2. how we can coordinate, and what are the objectives at the time that there is track 1, and the time that there is no track 1, like now that there is stalemate and we cannot go forward.
On track 2, I want to tell you that if you're on track 2, and this is for everybody, and I may be quoted on that, track 2, if you're acting in track 2, you don't have the legitimacy, you don't have the responsibility, and you don't have the power to implement what you're suggesting. And you have to be very much aware of this limitation. And what is needed to carry out track 2 when there are negotiations going on or not negotiations going on is a very serious sense of humility and discipline. And you don't have this humility and you don't have this discipline, you don't engage in track 2. I can give examples of people who did track 2 and had not this humility and not understood that they didn't have the responsibility and the legitimacy to do that. And I've stood up against them very strongly. Don't want to be more specific here. So this is on track 2. I think that track 2 is an instrument of the leadership, and you work, there has to be a flow of information between you and the leadership, and you check options that are not the official policy, and you make it either clear that you can go there or you can't go there. And both are successful outcomes of track 2 policy. I want to make this very, very clear. And I think this is the way I've maintained the activity for the last 30 years, because I personally believe that I have this kind of discipline and humility. Now let me go into the lessons learned as I put them, and I think they put things in a more greater context. I think the first lesson is that before you ever start negotiations, you have to have an understanding about the grand strategy. You have to know where you're going and why you're going there. Now, from our point of view, I'm speaking from the small group that I work together with, our aim is a Jewish and democratic state that lives peacefully in this region with the other areas. But I will tell you that what Moshe said before has been a major component of grand strategy thinking, and not of me, but of somebody far more important than me, namely of Yitzhak Rabin. The 3 dimensions of the conflict. We have been from the very beginning very much aware of the 3 dimensions of the conflict. Rabin, in a meeting with rabbis on the beginning of July 1990, told the following grand strategy to the rabbis. You have to understand the 3-dimensional component as follows. We live in 3 circles. There's the closest circle, the West Bank and Gaza, which is the Palestinian issue, which he said, if I'm Minister of Defense, or if I'm, at the moment he wasn't anymore, but if I'm Prime Minister, this is for the people who do the job, for the Chief of Staff and for the head of Central Command, the head of South Command to deal with it. I have to deal with the second circle. The second circle is Egypt, it's Jordan, it's Syria, it's Turkey, it's all the countries that are around it. We need to create a dialogue and confrontation with them. We need deterrence against them, but we need to create security cooperation with them. And this is my job as Minister of Defense to work with this Arab and Muslim world around us who are part of the construct. And then there's a third circle. And the third circle is Iran and Pakistan and Malaysia and Indonesia and whatever, maybe Nigeria today, where we don't have the security capacities to solve all the threats that go against us, and we need the United States to do the job for us. And because we need the United States to do this for us, and because we have to work together with Egypt, and we have to work together with Jordan, and we have to work together personally with Turkey, we have to make certain concessions in the West Bank and Gaza. Whatever these concessions may be, these are very, very essential. This was the grand strategy we were working on. And it was part of the 3-dimensional thinking, totally aware of the complexity of the conflict. Now, if we wanted a grand strategy, we had a grand strategy. What was the difficulty, and what gets me to the second lesson? There was a second grand strategy, and you, Moshe, represent the second grand strategy, which is different, which you have presented here wonderfully and very clearly. Now, that gets me to the second lesson. The second lesson means that as a second lesson, before you negotiate, you have to start to create what the South Africans call a sufficient majority in support of the policy. You have to move ahead in a dialogue between us and whoever is on the right or who has a different land strategy, and find where do we have common ground. Now I can tell you that if you read the third chapter of my book, that you will see that we did very successful Track 2 diplomacy behind the scenes to permit you as Minister of Foreign Affairs, together with Prime Minister Shamir, together with Shimon Peres, together with Rabin, to work on what was the Shamir-Rabin plan, became the 10 Mubarak points and the 5 Baker points. And it was not that we worked Track 2 on something which you opposed. We worked on Track 2 on a concept which you supported, but you failed to carry it through in the Likud Central Committee in February 1990, when Ariel Sharon and two other guys, Modai and David Levy, stood up and took the microphone and opposed you and didn't carry it through. So our concept was from the beginning that part of the grand strategy that you do in Track 2 is that you find to create as much as possible a joint position together. That is the task of a Track 2 diplomacy activity, and it's sometimes not easy, but you have to work. The third lesson is that you obviously have to know who your partner is, and you have to know one simple thing, that we have to deal with the partners. When I came back from Oslo, Arut Sheva, whatever this is in English, the Channel 7 interviewed me, and instead of interviewing me, they shouted at me, "How could you speak to those terrorists?" And my answer was, give me the Canadians as our neighbors, and I will speak to the Canadians. But they are our neighbors. They are part of it. If our neighbors feel bad...
תתבייש לך.
Okay, בסדר.
תתבייש לך.
אל תפריע. אל תפריע.
If our neighbors feel bad, if our neighbors feel bad, and our neighbors have a very tough living conditions, we will pay the price. It is simple as that. If they are not, their situation is not going to do, they suffer under occupation. We are in a very, very bad situation. And therefore we have to find a way to find a partnership with our things. And we are the adults. It is for us to make the first steps, and not only to dictate to them and act out of a position of power, but to see where is the common ground and find out common ground. And I will tell you afterwards that Rabbi know how to do that. Lesson number 4.
You were also 24?
No, I've got 7. Okay, I've got 7. Lesson number 4 is you need, in order to win the war against all our enemies, if you want to win the war against all our enemies, you need to marginalize the coalition of your enemies and widen your own coalition. It means we have to turn our European friends into real allies. We have the United States and not alienate them and turn into real allies. And we have to turn our regional friends into real allies. And I can tell you today that Egypt is a real ally, and Jordan is a real ally. And if you take measures on the West Bank and Gaza that cause trouble to the Palestinians, you alienate them with them, and you isolate Israel, and you undermine the very existence and the security of the State of Israel in a way which I believe is irresponsible. So this is the 4th lesson, which I believe is very, very important. Now, I think I don't have a 5th lesson. I only have a 6th lesson. Okay. So the next lesson is you have to understand the reasons for successes and failures. I would go long to read the book on it. It is awesome. I'll come to my last lesson. Throughout the last 25 years, since 1978, which is longer, which is 22 and 17, throughout the last 37 years, we have tried 3 paradigms. We've tried the paradigm of Camp David, which I wasn't part of, but the Likud government led, which the paradigm of Camp David says on the Palestinian issue, you have negotiations, self-government, you solve the core issues of conflict, and then you go to state building or whatever it is, then you go to this. I believe basically this paradigm is wrong. This paradigm has been proved not to work 5, 6 times. And we need a different paradigm, but we need a different paradigm, which means you have we have negotiations, we have self-government, we have the Palestinian Authority. From there, we go to developing a peaceful two-state solution, but creating the institutions, the reality of a two-state solution on the ground. And it's not nothing, everything but nothing, but it is a lot of things we have common interests in order to improve and to create a substantial, effective Palestinian Authority, which is there and which is part of, we have a long and very important say to do it. And then you negotiate the core issues. Now you need the first paradigm in order to say where you're going. And you will need the first paradigm to say, okay, we are not going, we're not a sea, we're not a ship in the sea not knowing where to go. We know this is the direction that we're going. Now the direction the international community is going, I believe we have to go, is a peaceful two-state solution under conditions that will strengthen Israel's security, Israel's stability, and the stability in the region. If you say this is not possible, we have to see what are the reasons and deal with the problems you speak and deal with them. The second paradigm that was developed was the unilateral disengagement of Sharon, which we can discuss, but if you do it cleverly, if you do it along the lines that the Ephraim Sneh and on track 2 developed, and also in many ways part of Sharon did some things that make a lot of sense, but it is coordinated. There's a lot of ways you can move forward in stabilizing the situation. And the third paradigm that we have is the roadmap of 2003 in 3 phases. Phase 1, you stop violence. Phase 2, you create stability, you create the conditions of a two-state solution on the ground. And stage 3, you deal with the core issues of conflict. What we have to do, the major lesson learned, is to put these 3 paradigms together and find a strategy that goes along with them. So I think these lessons are quite important, and I'll have to stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yair. Do we have more time for?
You have some more time.
Yes, another 5 minutes.
7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay. Israel, please. For paradigm, we are speaking about paradigms, so we can see that all the paradigms are not working. So
you want me to invent a new one right now?
Yes, I would like.
No, that's a point.
Yes,
the most important one. I'm sorry. I didn't do that.
I'm the leader here. Right.
Wow.
Okay. I would like to ask you if you believe that there is any way, because as we heard from Yair, there is the end-state paradigm, the process paradigm, and all those kinds of paradigms. What we can do in order to go, let's assume that after the election, the government of Israel will decide to initiate the peace process with the Palestinians. What we can do?
Ask me or
Her,
Ah.
lady.
Okay, thank you.
I have something for you also.
I must say that to put here a coherent and a clear solution to this problem is a little bit too much for me right now, since for the last 67 years, the government of Israel failed to do it. However, I would like to say a few things. It's clear now that the Palestinians have changed their strategy towards activity in the international arena, especially going to the UN, going to the ICC, and going to those places where they have, in their point of view, some kind of a relative advantage. I believe that one of the main problems of Israel is the international isolation. And I think that Yair was absolutely right, that before we go continue the negotiation, we need to know that first of all, the international community is behind it, and it supports this step. And I see here many members of the international community and many diplomats, and I believe that unless you recruit the international community to the next step and to renew the negotiation, I'm afraid that it will not work. Because my conclusion is that we cannot do it alone anymore. We cannot, the negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians without a third, fourth, fifth party is a little bit too much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Israel. Moshe, I would like to ask you, you said something like the status quo is sustainable. Is it?
First of all, it sustains, right? By definition. But,
It's overrated.
well, yeah, how many times has it been said it's not sustainable, and here it is. The question is, what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives? But I would like to emphasize one point maybe I didn't make sufficiently clear before, and I refer to something that was said by Ambassador de Bont.
Deputy Ambassador.
And he said, I think quite correctly, that when you negotiate, you have to know what it is you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? The answer to that is amazingly simple from the Israeli point of view. Peace, the end of the conflict. Right? We would like to achieve an agreement as a result of which the conflict with the Palestinians will be over. There will be no more conflict. Now, if you look at the Arab world today and the Palestinian world today, I think that everybody would have to agree that even if Israel were to arrive at an agreement with Mahmoud Abbas, that would not be the end of the conflict. The conflict would go on. Hamas would say, we don't accept it, don't accept this agreement. Terrorism would continue, Al-Qaeda would continue, Islamic State would continue. The conflict would not be over. So in that sense, the desire and the obvious aim that we would like to choose, that we would like to go for, is inachievable at the present time. Maybe things will change in the Arab world, maybe things will change in the Palestinian society. I said before, not caustically really, but in the days of Arafat, the feeling was that there was a man who could implement an agreement. If you were to sign an agreement with him, that would be the end of the conflict, at least as long as he was alive, as long as he was in power. Turns out that he didn't want an agreement. But he's the man who could have implemented it. Mahmoud Abbas, with all due respect, especially for the fact that he has forsworn terrorism, a very important step, is not in position to implement such an agreement. And it would not be the end of the conflict. So really talking about something very abstract and not very meaningful from the Israeli point of view.
Thank you very much, Moshe. Deputy Ambassador, would you like to respond? And we can mention also the problem of the Hamas, which is controlling Gaza, and who is going to, deal with the Hamas in order to change the reality.
And very strong in Judea and Samaria as well.
I don't think there's necessarily a contradiction between what I said and what you just said, Professor. It's just that I'm suggesting that if peace, as you rightly say, is unattainable at the present time, you have to negotiate something else. That's my point. Because I agree with you, it is it's very multi-layered. It is not as easy as some EU statements make it out to believe that are emanating from Brussels. But I come back to point 2 or rule 2, know the other side. And the point is often made by Israelis that time and again, and you made it also, General Dekel, that when push comes to shove, the Palestinians don't sign on the dotted line, they just don't respond, and they seem to walk away. Why is that? Ask yourself that question. They're not in a position to sign. What exactly is it that they're not in a position to sign away, to give away? What is it? And why is that? Is it because they fear a backlash from the Arab world? Is it their own people? These are some of the questions that I don't hear answers to. And I think you need to find answers to those ones, because that helps you to define what is it then that you can negotiate and how. And that right now, for me, it is too easy to hear Israeli politicians and Israeli officials say, well, look at the world around us. So this is not a time this is not a time for bold steps. I'm not suggesting bold steps. I'm suggesting practical steps, because there is a community of interest there. For now. But I think every day that passes, that community of interest will diminish, and at some point you will have Daesh on the West Bank. You will create it. That's, I think, is a serious fear that every Israeli needs that. And you cannot keep on with relying on that kind of security cooperation that keeps a lid on the things, because that lid will blow off at some point. That's my point.
As you know, there is Daesh also in other places or in the world, including Europe, but this is not the issue. I agree that this is something very important that I would like your response about it. I know that you would like to say something, but this is very important that there is a lot of people here in the room which present the foreign, let's say, the international community. And one of the major issues until now that everybody which is speaking about the peace process between us and the Palestinians, speaking about permanent status agreement. And the permanent status agreement, as I understand, and I assume most of the people in this side of the room don't believe that we are able to achieve a permanent status agreement because we cannot bridge the gaps between us and the Palestinians. But there is many other options. And we need the international community support for other options, because otherwise you are playing only the rule of the Palestinians, of all or nothing, that they prefer to stay, you know, in the current situation, not to create something else. And this is very important. And I would like you, Yair, to respond for that. If you believe that this is the time to change the paradigm to something else which will change your reality, I don't know how, but maybe you have the magic touch for that.
I think maybe three things. If the question is not peace or not peace, the question is, an important understanding is how to define peace. And if I read, for instance, the findings of those who negotiated in Ireland, you will hear Jonathan Powell saying peace is not a final agreement, a piece of paper you sign, but peace is a process according to which enemies gradually find to trust each other over a period of time. This we can achieve. This we can achieve. Now, two more short stories, and one negative and one very positive. I can tell you that I do discuss with Palestinian people who are in quite senior positions.
Shame on you.
What?
Shame on you. תתבייש לך רק פה. תתבייש לך.
אנחנו לא שוב באוניברסיטה. תתנהג בהתאם.
And they told me that they wanted to work on economic issues, on practical issues. And I asked them, why did you go for this Kerry thing, which had no choice of going? Why did you go for these things that you gave to me one and a half years ago, and you could actually achieve? And he said, yeah, I couldn't achieve it. I was asked to speak with a name, and I'll give you the name, it's Yitzhak Moshe. And one day he said yes, the other day he said maybe, the third day he said no. And there was nothing that instead, as a safety net, we could get. It was not everything or nothing, it was nothing. Now, if you have a government that doesn't understand that the other side has basic needs, you get yourself into a major disaster. And this is actually where we are today. Now, I'll tell you a third point. And the third point is Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin, and I'll tell you the short story which is in the book. Yitzhak Rabin had this three-circle grand strategy. And after we concluded the Oslo Declaration of Principles, he didn't give the negotiators a direction where he wanted to go. He had no clear answer what he wanted to do. But there was another story which Daniel Rothschild told me, who was in charge of working together with Rabin in preparing negotiations, the dialogue with Arafat. And Rabin told Daniel Rothschild, give me confidence-building measures that I can build some partnership with Arafat. And Daniel Rothschild gave Rabin 20 confidence-building measures. He said, give him 6, see how he reacts. If he reacts, finally give him another 6, and keep 8 for the follow-up. And then they came to Erges, and Rabin went up on the first floor, and Daniel Rothschild was downstairs. And after 7 minutes, Rabin called Daniel Rothschild, called him up, and told him, Danny, I gave him all the 20 confidence-building measures. Give me some more. Rabin understood that peace is confidence building, making confidence building. So if there's a fourth paradigm, the fourth paradigm, which I forgot to say, which is quite outrageous, the fourth paradigm is to develop a policy of confidence building with the other side. And if you tell me it's not possible, I tell you it is possible. And if you need my support as track 2, there'll be totally disciplined and totally agree whatever I think. The confidence building policy of this government towards the Palestinians is by all means possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Yair. Thank you very much, everybody. It was very interesting. And we can speak about this for, yes, many hours. So thank you very much.
I have to be strict with everybody who speaks to be not too long. Also, we are very happy to have that. I must say that this is to discuss the way forward. The way forward is probably the more complex one than lessons learned. So we can carry on about the past. It's not easy to be constructive about the future, but it is more important. Although the lessons learned should help us to look forward. I have the pleasure to invite my friend Daniel, who's been chairman of the Judea and Samaria Council, and he's a very important leader of the settler community, but also an important voice in Israeli politics. And I would like to ask Daniel to start and speak about the way forward.
Thank you, Yair. I think that my relationship with Dr. Hirschfeld is one of an improvable friendship in which we totally disagree about the past and surprisingly find some degree of agreement regarding the future, which is much more important. If we talk about track 2, I would also I recall today that my only meeting with Daniel and Abraham, he invited me once to meet him in an hotel in Jerusalem at the Crown Plaza, and we started to talk. We were a very big entourage, and then in the middle of our conversation, he said, "Danny, do you know what? Let's stop talking, jump to my car, and let's go to Ramallah to speak with to meet Salam Fayyad." And unfortunately, I got cold feet. It was after Salam Fayyad threw products of our communities into a bonfire in Salfit, and I rejected the offer, and I regret it to this very day. That could be an interesting track to experience. Now, fortunately, I can save my introduction, because as Udi said, today I believe there is no need anymore, as I used to start in past years, explaining why a negotiated agreement is not going to be reached in the foreseeable future. So I believe I can skip that part and go immediately into the future prospects. And I said that with Yair we almost disagree, or we mostly disagree, almost completely disagree regarding the past. And I am one of those persons that believe that the Oslo process was one of the most damaging experiences to the prospect of peace in the Middle East. And I believe that we are at least ahead of a generation in which no agreement, no peace agreement will be reached between Israelis and Palestinians. Now you can say, how do you say such a despairing assertion, 1 generation is a lot of time, but think about 1967, you could say the same thing and you would be right. Think about 1980, you could say the same thing and you would be proven right. And unfortunately, I believe we are in the same situation. And I blame part of it on Oslo. I sometimes jokingly say that, or half-jokingly say that for each year that passed since Oslo, we will need another additional year in order to get rid of the illusions and the misconceptions that Oslo created. So we are 21 years after Oslo. I believe that unfortunately we have to at least 21 years ahead of us in which no agreement will be reached. So what do we do under those circumstances? There are 3 alternatives. The first alternative is to despair. I call it the Gewalt option. For those that are not familiar with Yiddish, Gewalt is Yiddish for Oivei. That's of course not an acceptable policy. The second option is unilateral steps. Well, I think that they will be unilateral steps, and when I say unilateral steps, the usual meaning is unilateral withdrawals, or unilateral coordinated withdrawals, or things like that. I think that the shares of unilateral withdrawals in Israel have never been lower. I don't think that the Israeli public or an Israeli government will in the foreseeable future adopt such a policy. So we are left apparently with the status quo, which as Professor Allens already said, people say it's unsustainable, but seems to be the most solid thing in the Middle East. Not only in our small region, but in the Middle East, in the broader meaning of the Middle East. But I don't think that maintaining the status quo as it is today is the best strategy we should adopt. I think that the strategy we should adopt is a radical improvement of the status quo, of the current status quo, and then maintain it. I once asked in the Saban Forum 2 years ago, I asked then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, I think it was her last appearance as Secretary of State, I told them, Madam Secretary, you say that the status quo is not sustainable, but the status quo is going to be with us apparently for some time. So what do you think about improving it and then strengthening it instead of undermining it by self-fulfilling prophecies like saying that it's unsustainable? And her answer surprised me. I expected a categorical no, and her answer was that in the short term, and she defined short term as 3 to 5 years, that could be a good policy. I was tempted to tell her that in Jewish history the short term is 200 years, but I didn't. Now, I believe that we can make radical improvements in the current situation on the ground, even under the absence of peace. I call it peaceful non-reconciliation. I don't see a reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians in the near future, but I think the best strategy for all of us, Jews and Palestinians, is to do it in a civilized, peaceful way. It doesn't solve the problems. It doesn't fulfill the main national aspirations of the Palestinians. That's the maximum we can get. I will make 2 or 3 points that are central to my suggestion. The first one is obviously human rights. You don't need peace. You don't need a peace agreement in order to improve the human rights situation of the Palestinians. the main issue is, of course, freedom of movement. If, and this is a very, very, very big if security prevails, if terrorism, but terrorism driven by the Palestinian establishment subsides, then Israel should engage in a very, very ambitious plan of granting, of removing all the checkpoints. Ultimately, the goal should be the full removal of the security barrier that Israel was forced to establish 10 years ago. Not immediately, of course, and in a way that is retractable, in a way that is reversible. But that should be the goal. I would like very much to see software engineers from Ramallah working in the Kiryat Atidim high-tech area of Tel Aviv. You don't need peace for that. All you need is absence of terror. I would like to see, for instance, the so-called civil administration become really civil. I think a Palestinian, a 50-year-old lawyer from Nablus, in his interfaces with the Israeli government, with the Israeli authorities, is entitled to receive service, to be served by a neatly dressed Israeli clerk that knows how to give service, and not by an 18-year-old male or female soldier that all she cares is about the next few days of leave. And the most important thing, but also the most difficult one, is the issue of the refugee camps. There are dozens of refugee camps scattered across Judea and Samaria. They are, the persons living there are not really refugees. They are the 5th generation descendants of original refugees. I understand that their aspiration is what they call the return to Jaffa, to Beersheba, to Lord, etc., etc. I am not asking them to give up that wish, that will, as far-fetched as it is. But why should they dwell in the 21st century in squalid conditions? Imagine what effect could have a completely revamp, a completely renovation of those refugee camps and giving them decent lives suitable of the 21st century, without giving up any political demand. Because the political demands will be decided when peace comes. Now, I presented my plan in a very, very unfortunate timing. I published it in the New York Times and in Haaretz simultaneously. Unfortunately, 3 days before the 3 kids were kidnapped and murdered in Gush Etzion, and the whole region deteriorated into war. I got a lot of phone calls that day, but I want to talk about 2 of them that encouraged me very much. Because both were from persons that I highly appreciate. Both are security experts, and I think security is the main deficiency of my suggestion. And each one of them comes from a completely different ideological background. And each one of them advocates a completely different ultimate solution to the conflict. One, which I was not surprised of, was Professor Arens. He called me and completely endorsed, he even did that in writing in a subsequent article in Arens. And the other one was from Yuval Diskin, the former head of the GSS. And Yuval told me, you know, Danny, I completely endorse your plan, because I think that what we need now is to detoxify the atmosphere, and then let's go ahead with full steam to the two-state solution, which I of course disagree. But I suppose I have to wrap up, right? Okay, so I will always say this. This is not a peace plan. It doesn't bring peace, it doesn't solve the most important issue of civil rights. It doesn't. I am completely aware that it is the most important issue. The issue of national aspirations, the issue of political status, etc., etc. But the difference between what I'm suggesting and the current, let's say, conventional suggestions is that I think with some degree of goodwill, it is doable. Now, you don't get a Nobel Peace Prize for doing that. It's less heroic than reaching a full-fledged peace agreement and signing it in the south lawn of the White House, etc., etc. It's less, as I said, less glorious, less heroic. But I think it's the right way to go right now, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances.
Okay, many thanks. I think it's important food for thought. Our next speaker is Nimrod Novik. He was political advisor to Prime Minister Shimon Peres, political advisor also to Minister of Finance Shimon Peres. He has worked in the private sector since 1991 and has led two or three most important projects with Egypt. And he's a good friend, and we have worked together for the last 35 years, 34 years or something.
Indeed.
Indeed. So please, Nico.
Thank you, Yair. I always like to quote our Supreme Court Justice Joachim Rubinstein, who opens every speech by saying, before I speak, I would like to say a few words. So before I speak, I want to say a few words about Yair's book. I am among the fortunate ones who have read it, cover to cover. It's a fascinating story. I would say more praise of it if I didn't have a minor part in the story that is unfolded between those pages. But it put in perspective so many things, it brings back to light so many things, it produces lessons that are more important than anything else. And indeed, some of the lessons we heard here are quite impressive from the inside and from the outside, very impressive. But it also does something that I wasn't aware of, and I mentioned it in another place, that when Yaron London interviewed Yair on London and Kirschenbaum, he started by expressing astonishment that Oslo didn't start with Yair going to Oslo, that Oslo started with 2 decades before Oslo, a lot of work and groundwork and track to and building trust and gaining experience and drawing lessons and then going with all that weight into this new chapter of the process. Now obviously I have a different appreciation of the Oslo process, what it brought about and what would have happened without it than some of the speakers on the previous panel. But this panel is not dealing with the past, but with the future. I would like to start by submitting, and here I'm being very presumptuous. I'm submitting that the difference between Yuval Diskin and you is that what you count in years, he counts in months. When he says that your idea of camouflaging and giving some manicure and pedicure and some rouge on the lips, to the status quo, is a good idea to build confidence, I don't think that he has a generation in mind. But I don't want to speak for him. I want to say that whatever government is formed after the March 17th elections, and in the 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it will take to form a government, whatever government will form will be faced with several clocks ticking against it. And we can ignore those clocks and say, let's do some improvement on the status quo. Or we can look at those clocks and say, what is the bottom line that they spell out and what is required? One clock, none of them is new. You're all familiar with them, so I'm not going to belabor the point. One of them is the whole notion on the whole issue of internationalization of the conflict. Now, I'm not talking just about the PA going, or the PLO, going to the ICC and the UN Security Council. I'm talking about a far broader global process of internationalizing the conflict with, for example, the idea of UN Security Council resolution, perhaps driven by the Europeans and not vetoed by the Americans, can no longer be ruled out. I don't know what the prospects are, but drafts are being circulated, and what we hear from Washington is intriguing. It's not the usual old stuff. So we have the BDS process that I hope we are all united in fighting as hard as possible. We have the UN Security Council resolution process on which we will probably be divided. Whether it is constructive or destructive depends on how balanced and how supportive it is on Israeli basic needs like security, like ruling out flooding Israel with refugees, and like the Jewish state thing that people take lightly and I don't. The second process is everything that is associated with violence. And violence from the Daesh spectacular and its attractiveness to some Palestinians, some Israeli Arabs, but the overall regional mess and its potential destabilizing effect on our two most important strategic partners in the region, which is Egypt and Jordan. Both of them have been handling it in a very impressive and determined way, but it's the nature of these forces that one could never, ever take them lightly. But this also involves the potential risk of the dismantling of the PA or otherwise undermining security cooperation. And one doesn't have to be a security expert to hear the concern in Tel Aviv, in the Kiryat. God forbid that this would happen. Now, some will not give Oslo credit for the fact that there is Palestinian security cooperation. Some will, but that's beside the point. Its disappearance will create a completely different environment for every Israeli citizen in the major population centers and elsewhere. And the third clock is, of course, the demographic clock. And again, here too, I will not belabor. I think everybody knows the code word and what it means. I think that the convergence of all three suggests that whichever government is formed after March 17 will seek to check at least the first two by whatever means is available and depending on the structure of the coalition. There's only one government, if formed, that might not do that, and that's if we have a Likud, a Jewish home as a core coalition, but I think that any other coalition will come up with some kind of an initiative. And not a cosmetic one, but one that is more ambitious. I think that they will try to launch an initiative in order to prevent a UN Security Council resolution, but failing that, to improve on it, to make it balanced. And in order to stabilize the situation in the West Bank, shore up the PA, including the economic situation and the money that has been stopped. I don't think this would, I would venture that this will not last much beyond March 17. But I think that whatever initiative is going to come up, whether it comes up of Europe, whether it comes up of Washington, whether it comes out of the joint effort, or if it comes up as a almost exclusively Israeli initiative, which I hope it is, I think we'll have three layers, which in a way relate to the three circles strategy, but more with the Rubin interpretation than with the Arendt's interpretation of those three circles. And therefore, it will be a three-layer initiative. And depending on the character and composition of the coalition, they differ in the weight and dynamics of each of these three layers. The three layers are, again, I'm not telling you anything that has not been the buzzword already. If you remember, the last buzzword in the region about peace was when Kerry launched his initiative and he said borders and security first. Wherever you went, in Washington, elsewhere, border and security first. Why? Because border and security is easier than refugees in Jerusalem. And therefore, border and security first. And he went with border and security first, head straight into the wall, banged it in the wall once, twice, three times, and then the obvious manifested itself, that the particular government that we had at the time could not produce a map, and therefore no borders, period. That government could not produce a map because if Prime Minister Netanyahu would produce a map that is good for the process, he has no coalition. And if he produces a map that is good, I really held myself not to interfere when you spoke. It wasn't easy. I asked for the same consideration. And if he produces a map that is good for the coalition, he exposes himself as no partner for the negotiation, and therefore there was no map indeed, even though the Palestinians did present a map, not once but three times. They presented it to Olmert, they presented it in Amman to the EU initiative in 2011, and they presented it again to Kerry, the famous 1.9% map. We all are familiar with it. Since I have to wrap up when I got to the punchline, the three layers that I'm talking about are as follows, and I will use the euphemism of a house. We're talking about a basement where what Daniel is suggesting will be part of that effort, which means rapid changes on the ground. Changing lifestyle, changing quality of life, changing dynamics and creating confidence among Palestinians that for a change, the process is no longer an excuse for continued occupation, but a beginning of an improvement of their situation. The second layer, on that layer too, there will be elements that have political significance, not just economic, not just removal of roadblocks and checkpoints, but also symbolic gestures that have political significance, such as some kind of a symbolic gesture in Jerusalem, for example, reopening Orient House for one purpose or another, limited purposes, but something that demonstrates that Israel understands that the end game is a two-state solution, however long it's going to take. The second layer, which is the living quarter, is the permanent status negotiations. And these will progress as slow as the coalition on our side and the coalition on the Palestinian side will allow. And it will drag. And I agree with Udi that no permanent status agreement is readily available on this side of the horizon. However, without permanent status negotiations, however stretched out and slow, the Palestinians will not be able to attain the basement of the changes on the ground. Because what was missing in Dani Dayan's plan is something that addresses the Palestinian political aspirations, even if the promise is only over the horizon. And the penthouse is the regional. And that's the one that was not mentioned here at all thus far, and I'm surprised, because while the region is full of dangers and mess, we all use Daesh, Al-Qaeda, Salafi, in Sinai, in Syria, in Iraq, whatever, North Africa. But it also paved with opportunities. I mean, you wake up a Saudi intelligence officer, an Israeli intelligence officer, and ask them in the middle of the night to give you the list of their strategic concerns, you'll be astonished by how they overlap. Both will say Iran nuclear, both will say Iran sub-nuclear ambitions, both will say cross-border terrorism, Islamic extremism, cross-border arm transfers in the region, regime stability in Jordan, Egyptian sovereignty manifest all over the Sinai. Both will come up with similar restraining Hamas, restraining Hezbollah. Both will come up with the same. However, there's very, very little that can be done unless by proxy and under the table, in a very limited way, as it's happening now, as opposed to transforming this potential, convergence of interest into a potential coordination of policy. So I think that whatever government comes up will try to do changes on the ground, negotiations for permanent status for as long as it takes, and an Arab support group for the process, which will not come to the table absent the living quarters, and that Israel can benefit from as a major bonus to a peace process.
Thank you very much. You've given quite a lot of food for thought. Ephraim is the director, chairman of the board of directors of the Center for Strategic Dialogue here. He's been a former deputy minister of defense, minister of transport, minister of health, and he's a brigadier general in his own right, and a doctor.
And an MD.
And well, is it okay to do Robert first and you afterwards? You have to vote?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, I am one of the last speakers, and I've learned one thing in my own career, that as one of the last speakers, I will not be long. Let me first then begin with you, Yair. The very reason for me being here is that book. And when I read that book, I found one of the very reasons why I am actually also still here. Because in that book, rich in historical detail, you also described that night of proximity talks in The Hague, which is one of those three activities which have later led to an Oslo breakthrough. You're quite right that there are always many activities going in the same direction. And what is important is that there is one that is successful, one of those second track. And it was successful at the time, and I think whatever you think about it, that was an achievement at the time. And again, Yair, I consider you one of my oldest friends, and I'm now sorry also to leave very soon after 7 years here in my position as as the United Nations Special Envoy for the Middle East peace process, a very long title. And let me just tell you, 7 years before I look forward, I have to look a bit backward. 7 years in which I was involved. 3 US-led initiatives, all 3 not succeeding. And it is not a coincidence, in my view, that these 3 US-led initiatives were actually followed by 3 wars in Gaza. After the Annapolis in 2008, we had the first Gaza war. Then we had, of course, under the first administration of Obama, Senator Mitchell's efforts. They were the longest talks about talks, I think, just to try to summarize what happened. And we had a second escalation in Gaza in November of 2012. And then, of course, last year we had a vigorous effort led by Secretary Kerry. But as one of the participants in that effort has once confided to me, it looked a bit like spinning the wheels in the mud, getting even further in the mud. And then we know in this very difficult conflict what the consequences are. And we have seen the most devastating conflict so far in Gaza. Gaza, by the way, being always those 7 years for me, the elephant in the room, the big elephant in the room. And you are all right by telling us that, of course, on the Palestinian side, there is no unity. The present government is, again, a make-believe unity government. It is actually hampering now our efforts, actually, to try to change the dynamics in Gaza, this time with the support of Israel. Israel is opening up the crossings at the moment to help to at least deal with the situation in Gaza, which is worse than ever, I can tell you, of course, after 3 wars. So if you allow that to fester, you can talk about peace, but it will explode in your face at some point again. So that's why I do believe that Gaza is very important in any strategy you have for the future. And maybe it is possible with Hamas to think about a hudna for reconstruction. You know, that is basically what you should be thinking about. So I've said it, 3 initiatives. If you keep repeating the same experiment and you expect different results, you know what Einstein said about that once. That's the definition of insanity. And now, frankly, I want to be a little bit provocative. What I'm hearing from you is not much different. You know, I hear the same ideas actually again being suggested for a way forward. I must tell you that in these 7 years, I felt that I've been part of kicking a can down an endless road to nowhere. I have been since 2012 warning in my briefings in the Security Council that the one-state reality is on your doorstep. It's emerging. Now, then the question is again, what do you want? How do you define yourselves? You know, if you continue this way, then if it is one state, you know that what the world will expect from you, that you will give all the citizens in that state equal rights. I find, by the way, what President Rivlin has been saying more recently fascinating in terms of defining our values. He has been saying Israel, and he referring to your independence declaration, it's 2 basic things. It's a Jewish and a democratic state, and both are equally important. Now again, if I talk with Israeli Arabs, they will not tell me that that is actually the practice. But it is a very important vision. But you have to ask yourself, is that possible in a situation where you don't define your border, your eastern border? Because then it's not 20%, that's the demographic factor you have been referring to. I feel that whatever has happened now in these 7 years I have been part of, has been leading, and I haven't talked about a 3rd track in the past 7 years, which is that Abbas, yes, he went to the UN, he went to the internationalization. I think it was partly, indeed, because of his inability to make progress on negotiations, and I know that your side is not the only one to be blamed when it comes to tackling the real final status issues. I know what happened in the last Kerry round. I have been very much encouraging my American friends, if you failed, put it on the table as your proposal. It hasn't happened so far. That may, I say may, happen in the future after the elections. Now, I also want to leave one clear warning here with you. For me, Oslo is not yet dead. Oslo is dead when security coordination is stopped. Then you can take it all over again. Then billions of investments of the international community can be written off, because that will lead to the implosion of the Palestinian Authority. It hasn't happened yet. But if after your elections, and I'm not even sure that Abbas is not doing it even before the elections, with the present situation where the revenues have been cut, because that Palestinian Authority is very, very fragile at this point. If it happens, then that's indeed the end of Oslo. And it is, in my view, almost surely going to happen if you don't deal with that settlement issue. If there is not some clear understanding on restraint, I know what Abbas will do. I'm convinced. There will be no future then in whatever you discuss. I feel that you have to think, as Israel, where you want to go, how you define yourself. And then it is very important also to think about the regional. You said it. We haven't been talking very much about the regional. I can see a very simple peace process that would work. If you have a government after in March, after a government which is formed, which is willing to do something meaningful on the settlement issue, then we can ask the Arabs also to do something meaningful when it comes to the Arab Peace Initiative. And then you can start to put something together again. The other aspect of it is that I've listened to you, Mr. Dayan. I totally agree with you that we need confidence building steps. But confidence building steps on the ground without any definition of where you want to go, I don't think that will work. So you need to think about, again, what is indeed the end game. And maybe for once, I tell you, my Israeli friends, leave it to others to define that. You don't have to accept everything which is in an international framework. Of course, it was wrong for the Palestinians to go to the council, because how can a framework come from one party? And it failed, and we are where we are now. I must tell you, I leave Israel and Palestine with a heavy heart, I must say, because I really have a feeling that things in the coming months, if we are not able to pick things up, as I have been describing, can mean that your first scenario will be the reality. I call it the one-state reality, you called it despair. No, nothing. And then we know what happens in this situation. So again, I don't want to, because I've also learned one thing as a mediator: you should never end with a negative conclusion. I've given you some ideas here in terms of how I see that we can actually continue. And I know that is also then, if you are able to go in this in such a direction, that you will have a partner in Ramallah. But I also challenge you to think about Gaza and how you actually could also maybe even enable that finally also on the Palestinian side there is not this total lack of any of a strategy, which of course is also something which makes me so worried that it happens right at this juncture.
Many thanks. This has been a tremendously reality related approach. And I must say I believe uplifting because it shows a very clear going forward. And I'm very proud to be your friend.
Me too.
Can I ask Dr. Frank Snee to introduce you, please?
You did perfectly. Okay. When Yasser Arafat was very sick, a very senior Israeli intelligence officer came to the cabinet to brief about the condition of Arafat. And because there was a great deal of confusion and uncertainty, and said there are two basic possibilities. One, that he will die. The second, that he will not. And I'm more or less, that's what I have to say about the title of this session, Track to Diplomacy, what's next? 40 days from today, as was several times mentioned here, we will have election. And there are two candidates for the future prime minister. One is Yair Hirschfeld, one is Benjamin Netanyahu. And this will define the outcome in a very, very clear way. And I will speak, elaborate more about the option that Mr. Hirschfeld will be asked by the President to build the future coalition. In this case, will be no need for track 2, will be track 1. The government...
אין דבר כזה.
Sorry?
אין דבר כזה.
Okay.
You always need prayer.
And immediately after this government assume office, will start negotiation with the Palestinian Authority. Immediately. No doubt it will use the fruits of previous track to work in order to build the bricks of the negotiation. But will be one official negotiation between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. Few words about this negotiation. One, unlike what you said, the gaps are broad. It depends between whom. I'm sure if you take Daniel and Abbas, how they see the future of the West Bank, the gaps are very unbelievable, maybe unbelievable. I can tell you that in most of the core issues, the mainstream of the Israeli Zionist mainstream Zionist peace camp and the mainstream Palestinian leadership, all the gaps are bridgeable. All the gaps are bridgeable. There are easier things, more complicated, but all the gaps are bridgeable. One of the conditions for that, and this is another comment, all the narrative, both narratives, the Jewish or the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian nation narrative, remain outside the room. Every side comes with its own narrative, the other side has to respect it, but it is not a part of the negotiation. If we put the narratives in, no success. There is no chance to agree on the past, only on the future. Another comment, there is no need in third party. If the negotiation is between two parties that each of them, of its own reasons, are eager to reach agreement, there is no need of third party. You need a third party when you conducted the talks with Abbas? No. Why? Because you wanted to reach agreement. Most of them were out of the picture. Whenever we wanted to reach something, third party was out of the picture, and it went quite well. Third party is needed when the two sides either do not want or can't, for any other political reason, to reach agreement. And in many cases, the result is not very desired because basically lack of understanding of the mentality of both sides. And I will not mention it. What is terribly needed is Arab support to Abbas. Arab support to Abbas. It's not a third party. It's broaden the front or the backing of Abbas in the negotiation. Today, it is easier and it's obtainable because of what Nimon said. The conversion of interest between between Israel and all the, I would say, non-crazy Arab states is maximum. What you described vividly as you wake them up in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, they will say the same thing. Yes, that's a reality. And it's easier for us, and that's what we are missing in those days. We have a unique opportunity to have a very sound envelope of support for the negotiation from the Arab side. And for the important Arab nations, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Jordan. So the regional context here is supportive, and it's important to know. Again, we are not, this negotiation is not separate or isolated from the regional strategic context. Iran, Daesh, it's all bring closer those partners who want to live here, not under the black flag and not under the Iranian flag. And this is the real fault line in the region. And if will be negotiation, the fault line will be very, very clear. And Israel and Palestine are on the same side of the fault line. So this is one option. But as you see today, the figures, it's possible that Mr. Netanyahu will be the next prime minister. And he will not do it alone. It will be a very almost monolithic coalition with the Orthodox parties, with the right wing, and in this case, will be no serious negotiation. Even the ideas of Daniel, who are sincerely benevolent, will be brutally rejected by this government. It's in total contradiction to what the major partners, Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, are ready to think about. So we are going, after March 17th, a situation of either or. And preemptively, I would say, maybe that if it would be national unity government, what then will say? It's my personal opinion, the viability or the life expectancy, if I speak in medical terms, the life expectancy of this government is very, very short, because I enter here party politics, which I for 6 years try to avoid, but I can't give you an appropriate answer without it. In both major parties, the majority would not enable the leader to make the necessary concessions in order to keep the cohabitation continued. This cohabitation of two major parties requires mutual concessions. The tolerance, the patience of most of the MKs in both parties is very, very short. And it will be impossible for both leaders to maintain it, and this government is doomed for few months of life. No more than that. That is for the time being.
Many thanks, Ephraim. According to the program, I'm supposed to say the last words that didn't open up. Many thanks for, I believe that this afternoon, evening, has been extremely constructive. First of all, I want to thank Esti Offer and Eli Friedman. Did wonderful work to make this happen, behind the scenes and quietly, and also the Academy. And I want to thank Ephraim, gave me full backing in order to move ahead on that. I want to say what are the main issues in a more personal note that have moved me in pursuing this 35 years of Take Two activity, not standing up against shouts of, not actually discussing publicly that I'm not a criminal, but the criminals are other people. It has to be understood that the conflict between us and the Palestinians is an existential conflict. Some 20 minutes ago, one of my grandchildren has left this base, and another grandchild, the bigger one, is also left together. We actually, what we are dealing in is fighting for the well-being of our grandchildren. In an existential conflict where two people are threatened seriously by substance in their existence one by the other. And it is so important, and so important that it is not something you can give up. And not that I will be pleased about a government that I may not like next time. But I can tell you one simple fact that is maybe very peculiar. The peace process is life after death. The peace process is being called death many times. And I agree with Robert saying that the reality on the ground makes a big, big difference. And what is possible changes. But there's no way when Israelis and Palestinians cannot, they will have to come back and come to terms with each other, one way or the other. Or we may be killing each other for time, but in the end we have to live together one beside the other. And this is a basic fact that must be understood by all sides. I would say in this, if this is the given context, the major leading concept, the major guiding concept of what I fought for as a small screw-in behind the scenes, sometimes successfully, sometimes with a lot of failures, but which has been a major guideline is of course the very existence of both our people, but to try and make a major effort to live up to moral standards of humanity and moral standards of Judaism. And they go together. And if the conflict causes us to do outrageous activities, then something is wrong. And I must say, I will argue shortly afterwards and try to tell you that our security, the security needs of Israel do not contradict moral obligations, but they go together with it. They are part of it. Without keeping our moral obligations, we will have no security. As simple as that. And I must say that the second, and there's a clear political logic of it, and the political logic combines me and Daniel. Because in order to go forward with the Palestinians, I believe that an internal dialogue is necessary. I understand that negotiations are always led on two levels. It is always the negotiations with the enemy at the other side, but it's the negotiations with your own people. And without a serious dialogue with Daniel and with this, we will not make a major difference. And therefore, it's been extremely important for me that Daniel is coming and the Shaarens are coming, even if we disagree. Now, the internal understanding between us and our internal opponents, The internal understanding does not have to be full agreement on the strategy and on the outcome. But you can have an understanding on 3 levels. You can have an understanding on the substance. And I believe what Daniel has put here is putting an understanding on the substance here, that on the first phase, the first year, we have a common goal to move ahead, to change reality on the ground, and make a major move ahead in state building. Of course, agree with most of Nimrod's and Robert Serri's apartments, but substance is the highest way. The second option, if you don't fully agree on the substance, and we will not fully agree on the substance, the second option is that beyond the substance, you have to have an understanding on the process. And if you don't have a full understanding on the process, you have to have an understanding on the terms of engagement. But I believe on the terms of the process, we can have an understanding. And I believe that the next government will be able to negotiate, to move forward and negotiate towards a process of a real process of peace finding. And we will have to have a referendum that the people will support the agreement that has been negotiated by the government. And the referendum will be an important part. It has religious meanings in Judaism, but it has the meaning that in a democracy you need a majority to carry out what you have to do. So I believe that the moral issues between us and the Palestinians, within ourselves, and the context of understanding how we move ahead is essential. And I will try to work for it behind the scenes, above the scenes, below the scenes, wherever I can do it. The second issue has always been the call for security. And let me give you an understanding where the call for security is and how I understand the call for security. The call for security has to be seen, to my understanding, according to 3 major principles of Mr. Clausewitz, who wrote this long time before all of us. The first one is that the struggle against Daesh and the struggle against Hamas and the struggle against Hezbollah is a struggle of life and death. And what we need, it is a clash of wills, it is a contest of wills, and we have to show the determination to fight this through with all the difficulties. And security can only be achieved with the determination to go through it. There's a second part to it. The second principle, and you have to combine all principles together to understand what I'm saying. The second principle is that you have to maintain the unity of the people, the army, and the government. And security means that you take care of the well-being of the people on both sides. You need the security. If you want security cooperation on the Palestinian side, you have to see that there can be a basic unity of the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian security forces, and the people, and you need it on our side too. It means many, many things that you can translate into practical politics. And the third principle of Clausewitz is that you need to understand that security has a very important diplomatic dimension. And you cannot do this in this fight against Daesh, against those outrageous people who did these outrageous things only the last time. We have an enormous partner in Egypt. We have an enormous important partner in Jordan. I believe we have, I don't know what's happening in Saudi Arabia today because of the change going on there. I believe we have an enormous important partner in Jordan. And we have potentially a very important partner in Europe who have to face the same things. We are on the outline of this future. And we are together in the boat. If we don't hang together in this struggle, each of us will hang separately. And we will be the first to hang. This is true, the Palestinians and us. But there is a common case, a common need, and I do believe that the internationalization of the conflict in a certain way, a part and the base of a dialogue of thinking together how to solve the problems, makes major sense. And in this case, track 2, diplomacy will be important always, whatever government you have, because the understanding is to understand how do we go together and how do we move together and how do we create a coordinated force and take the same things is important. And I believe what Robert Serri said is of enormous importance because he's actually shown the direction that we can go in and that will make a lot of difference. Now, one more word on a more theoretical issue, and this is whether we are really in a confrontation of civilizations. And I can tell you, from all the 35 years of dialogue that I've had with Palestinians, with Egyptians, with Jordanians, with Turks, even with Iranians very little. I can tell you, we are not in a confrontation, a clash of civilizations. We are clash within civilizations. There's a clash within Egypt, there's a clash within Jordan, there's a clash within Palestine, there's a clash also within Israel. And there are difficulties in other places. The clash of civilizations, as there would be a clash of civilizations, I might be helpless. If there's a clash, the clash within civilizations means that they're potential allies we have to work with, we have to gather with, and see that we get a better future for all of us and also for our children. Thank you.
Wonderful.